This video offers an explanation of a core principle of Buddhism, the doctrine of no self, anatman or anatta. And before we get into it, just a little bit of a review about what the soul or self is, according to the other traditions that we've looked at so far in the course. In reality, the Hebrew Bible doesn't have a coherent idea of the soul. There's the notion of the breath, the living breath that God breathes into Adam and that adheres in all people. It's called nephesh. And there's kind of an analogy in the Hebrew Bible between the ruach, or the divine breath of God, and the nephesh, or the living breath of human beings. So when you die, the breath goes out of you. The concept of the soul is very important in Christian theology because of the idea of continuity after death and the resurrection of the body. It was also understood for a long time that the soul was the means through which God actually communicated to people. So your conscience or your sort of moral orientation, the idea of like the good angel sitting on one shoulder, was really thought to be God speaking to you through the soul, right? Yeah, and parenthetically, because of this, for a long time, Christians couldn't understand how an atheist could possibly be a good person, even, right? Because you have to be a believing Christian for God to be able to speak to you. We saw a little bit about what Krishna has to say regarding the nature of the immortal soul. The Atman is a Sanskrit word for it in the Bhagavad Gita. There's some positive description of what the soul is. It's something that is imperishable, that is immortal, that transfers from one body to the next after death. But the Buddhist objection to all of this is going to be to say that, okay, I mean, you have some sort of vague descriptions of what this thing, the Atman, is, but when we really try to put our finger on it and pin down what Hindus mean by the soul, the Atman, it becomes very slippery. So slippery, in fact, Buddhists say it's not really a coherent concept at all. So the Buddhist doctrine of anatman is really a critique of the coherence of this idea of the personal immortal soul. And beyond that, at an even deeper level, Buddhists are going to say that some idea of a coherent self, this thing inside you that never changes, is also a kind of attachment, right? It's an attachment to this idea that you are who you are and that this is never going to change. And Buddhists regard it as a form of clinging and even egoism. So the Buddhist critique of the self or the soul is something that marries very closely with the second noble truth of the idea of clinging or grasping, craving after and enduring self is an ultimate kind of attachment for Buddhists. And to try to explain a little bit better what Buddhists are talking about, you can divide the argument up into two lines of reasoning. One is the critique of the idea of a diachronic self. Diachronic means across time, or the critique of the idea that there is some self which endures throughout even one person's lifetime, right? What is the self over one lifetime? And of course, to answer this problem, what is the self over the course of many lifetimes, as Hindus or others who believe in reincarnation have to do, becomes even more difficult. It becomes a sort of compounded problem. So to get into this, I mean, we have to ask the question, what is it that makes you you? Is there some point in your life when you became the authentic person that you are and you reach some age of emotional maturity and that's what it is? Are you born a certain way and there's some essence to yourself from the time that you're born or from the time that you're a little toddler that's going to carry all the way through? What is the thing that makes you you? What collection of traits or attributes or physical characteristics? So I was born in near Syracuse, New York, and I grew up down the street from my grandparents, and my grandparents had a dairy farm. And every weekend, my brother and I would go there, and my grandma would give us a lot of milk that they got fresh from the farm. And so, I grew up liking milk. I drank milk my whole life. I still drink milk. Sometimes people might make fun of me for it, but even when I'm an old person, barring any sort of lactose intolerance, I'll probably still drink milk, right? Justin Henry drinks milk. So this is some, I have positive associations with my childhood uh, associated with milk. Is this one of a number of attributes that makes Justin Henry Justin Henry? And when we do this exercise in class, I ask people, what is it that makes you you? And people debate about whether there's a time in your young adult life when you're sort of fully formed, or people debate about whether there's something hardwired in your biology that makes you who you are, right? Or people say that, maybe this is a series of commitments that you make at one point in your life. And if you stick to those commitments, then you can say that you have an authentic self, right? And those are all well, things that you can think about and debate on your own. Inevitably in class discussion, the question comes up, well, there are all these things like cornerstone memories, things that are the kinds of questions you have on the drop-down menu when you set up an online bank account to reset your password. What's the name of your fifth grade teacher, the name of your first pet, your mother's maiden name, all these questions. And why do they ask those questions? Because those are things that you're presumably never going to forget, right? Things that are unique to you, touchstone memories, including, the names of members of your family and your closest friends, right? And then we ask, well, are there ever times in people's lives when they forget things like that? When they forget who their first grade teacher was? They forget their mother's maiden name? They even forget the name of their children? And the answer is, well, for some people, yes, right? I mean, people who have some sort of accident or disease and some localized brain damage, or more commonly, people who have dementia and old age, right? I assign this very short article that's about this personality study, looking at basic personality traits about people's intellectual curiosity, their level of patience, all these sort of like basic personality assessments. And this was a long-term study that was done periodically for people who were 14 when they first took it, who did it throughout their lives, and then took it in the end when they were 77. And the finding of the study was that people actually change a lot. People's personalities change a lot from the time that they're teenagers to the time that they're retirees, right? This is, I mean, there's also the problem that Buddhists put a lot of emphasis on, which is the fact that the body changes, right? I mean, our bodies can change a great deal. And most of our cells from the time that we're born to the time that we die are going to be replaced. It was for a long time dogma in neuroscience that we were born with the same number of brain cells that we die with, and that our brain cells don't get replaced. But that's actually been disproven, and we know now that even the neurons in our brain are cells that that die and are replaced also. So there's this kind of, the body is like the ship of Theseus getting gradually replaced one cell at a time, right? So the Buddhist challenge is to say, okay, well, if you want to say that there's this thing, the self that endures throughout just one lifetime, then what is it? Is it some physical thing? Well, it doesn't seem like it. The body's changing all the time. Is it some set of memories or dispositions? Well, maybe, but there's no guarantee that those things don't change over time too. So the Buddhist is putting the burden of proof on the person who claims that there's a self throughout one lifetime. And of course, the problem only gets harder for a Hindu, right, who's saying, well, no, it's the Atman. It endures not just throughout one lifetime. Through many of the Buddhists are saying, okay, well, what is it? What is it? What is the Atman? The next lemma prong of the Buddhist critique is that of the synchronic self. Synchronic means at the same time. So here the Buddhist is shifting gears and saying, all right, well, forget about this problem about the self over time, but let's just look at one sliver of 1 second of our lives, the amount of time that it takes for one thought to gel in our brain. What is the self at that time, right? How does the self operate at any given moment in our conscious lives? And we have some intuitive idea that there's some part of us, some executive, the soul perhaps, that is taking all of our sensory information in, it's taking all these feelings and sensations in, maybe is sort of accounting for our emotional state at any one moment, and is then able to make a conscious decision about what we're actually going to do next, right? Some free will, some aspect of our consciousness, which is deciding what physical actions we're going to do, what words are going to come out of our mouth next, some sort of meta awareness, self awareness, which is able to make choices. But the Buddhist, in the synchronic critique of the self, is saying, well, okay, let's slow down a minute. Let's ask what's actually all of this stuff rattling around in our transom? What is our cognitive life? What are these things that are actually passing through our stream of consciousness at any given moment? And Buddhists here introduce what they call the five aggregates or the five skandhas. And they say that if you actually slow down your stream of consciousness and examine what is arising and subsiding at any given moment, all you really see are these five categories of mental events. And in between them, there's no room for this thing called the self, the soul, the executive. Really, this is all that there is passing through our mind at any given moment. The point of doing Buddhist meditation, they say, is actually to a kind of examination of your stream of consciousness, right? And ability actually to slow down and to parse out what's going on in any single thought moment, the amount of time that it takes for a coherent sentence and idea to form in our minds. And just to go through these five aggregates, and what Buddhists say is this process of the instigation of the formation of thoughts. We'll go through the five skandhas one by one. So the first step in a moment of perception that gives rise to intentional thought is the activation of our senses, the raw sensory data, the rupa, the first of the five skandhas, right? So if like imagine you're in a room and there's a plate of cookies on the table in front of you, and what's the first thing that we experience about it? The photons from the light are bouncing off of the cookies and they're hitting the optical receptors in our eyes, and some of the lipids from the butter of the cookies are wafting through the air and make contact with the olfactory perceptors in our nose. And so we have this kind of sensory raw data to which Buddhists say we have, before we've even had any conscious realization of what's happening, we have some reaction, positive, negative, or neutral to the sensory data that we're experiencing. Feeling, sensation, Vedana are the second of the five skandhas. So for most of us, the immediate reaction we're going to have to a plate of cookies is going to be a positive sort of sensation, right? Um, and you get a sense of this of like if you put your hand on a hot stove or something, right? Immediately the reflex goes off, and you didn't think, "Oh, my hand is on the hot stove." Your hand just moves before you've even had a chance to realize what's going on. Um, Buddhists say that it's only then that we have any formation of any sort of intentional, that is, words or pictures associated in our mind with what we're experiencing in the third stage of perception, the third skandha, sanya, intentionality, perception. And the part about the five skandhas, I think that's unique and interesting and worth thinking about is that Buddhists say that the fourth skandha is that of volition, which means like action, right? Buddhists say that before we've even had a chance to really reflect on what we're doing, our body is in motion. We already have this impulse towards action, right? We're already taking a step towards or leaning towards the plate of cookies before the fifth of the five skandhas, which is consciousness and conscious reflection. Um, before we even had a chance to think, a plate of cookies, I'd really like one, or I'm on a diet, so I really shouldn't be eating those cookies, right? Before that even happens, we have this impulse towards action and stuff. We actually are like physically in motion. Um, and this is, Buddhists say, really a consequence of these very deep-seated inclinations towards action, sankharas, habits that can very easily override our conscious reflection. Our habits, our sankharas, work before we've had a chance to actually think about what we're doing. And this is kind of an inversion of the way that we usually think about free will, right? Because we sort of have this idea that every choice that we make in our daily life is a result of conscious reflection, right? Like I'm thinking, oh, am I going to get Snapple or Powerade at the morning when I'm in the gas station, right? We're thinking about every little, am I going to do my homework or not do my homework? We're thinking about every little choice consciously. We're good consumers. But Buddhists are saying that actually our bodies are impelling us to do a lot of things that we don't even really consciously reflect on. Um, this is Buddhist psychology, ideas that people came up with 2,500 years ago. I'm not endorsing the five skandhas and this Buddhist view of action wholesale, but there are a few things I think that are worth thinking about. So I have two examples from psych literature. The first is the study of people who are up for parole and looking at how likely people are to be granted parole based on the time of day that they go up in front of the parole board. So this is a study of, I think, near to 1,000 cases in a couple different districts. And so I was looking at people who go up for the parole board at 9 a.m., 10 a.m., 11 a.m., all the way to the end of the day, and how likely are they to be granted parole. And what the authors of this study found was that if you go right after a meal, like early in the morning, or right after lunch, you have a more than 50% chance of being granted parole. But if you go right before lunch, your chance of being granted parole, if you have the 11:30 slot before the panel of judges on the parole board, your probability of being granted parole drops to near zero. Why? What changes? I all that changes is that the judges are hungry and they want to go to lunch, right? And if you ask these judges afterwards, well, why did you grant this guy at 9 o'clock and 1 o'clock parole, but not this other guy? Then they're very good at coming up with all sorts of legal justifications and citing precedent and giving all kinds of elaborate legal theory to explain why they didn't grant parole to the 11:30 time slot parolee. But on the basis of this study, it seems that those justifications might be ex post facto or after the fact, right? It could be that this, so the subconscious fact that these judges are hungry are affecting their rulings and judgments in ways that they're not even actually aware of. This is another experiment. This one is from 15 years ago, and I'm sure that there are more relevant studies since then. But this was a study that it was very simple. It involved bringing people into a psych lab, outfitting them with one of these fMRI electromagnetic brain resonance scanners, and showing them a series of letters on a screen in front of them, and asking them to press a bumper, left or right, and to say what letter was on the screen at the time they made up their mind to press the bumper. So, you'd be watching the screen and it would say A, B, C, and someone would think, okay, I'm going to press the right bumper. So they'd see the letter on the screen, C, they'd say C, and they'd press the right bumper, right? So this would be like in a matter of a millisecond of difference between saying C, right, F, left, H, right. Um, th- but the discovery was that the decision center of the prefrontal cortex was already fully illuminated, in many cases up to as far as 7 seconds before the experiment subjects actually pressed the button. That is, our brains had already made the decisions for us, whether we're going to press left or right, 7 seconds before they had any conscious awareness of it. So, our the physical electrochemistry of our brain is doing things that we don't become consciously aware of until quite a bit later, right? Um, this is, once again, I'm not saying that Buddhists understood the nature of human psychology 2,500 years ago, but I'm saying that their view of the fact that much of our cognitive life is something obscure to us, unknown to us, and the fact that we might have less free will, a lot less free will and agency than we think we do, is something to take seriously on the basis of some modern empirical science, right? The point of doing meditation for Buddhists, so on the one hand, they say that you can actually observe these arising and subsiding sensations as they occur and see that in between the spaces of Rupa, Vedana, Sanya, Sankhara, Vijnana, there's no little man behind the windows of our eyes, some homunculus inner self who's absorbing all this and making and making decisions, right? This is really just all that there is to mental life is these arising and subsiding of mental sensations. Um, the Buddhist challenge is to say, okay, well, where is there a soul, a self, an executive behind all this? And the practical aspect of this realization, Buddhists say, is that once you give up on this idea of a self behind it all, you stop having less self-centered, egocentric thoughts, less thoughts that things are happening to you, and more recognition simply of the arising and subsiding of sensations, right? So these thought Buddhists call this ahamkara or I saying kinds of thoughts or mental activity. So they say that once you get out of the habit of saying, "Oh, this I'm hungry, I'm bored," and say the sensation of hunger has arisen, the sensation of boredom has arisen, and recognize also that these are impermanent kinds of mental sensations, right? Hunger has arisen, but it, like all things, is impermanent, is going to subside. Boredom has arisen, but it, like all things, is impermanent, is going to subside. We have less of these anxiety producing sorts of thoughts. Attachment to the notion of the self and to first person language, I saying, is the ultimate kind of attachment, according to Buddhists. Regular meditation is a way of training the mind to focus on the world as you experience it moment to moment, rather than to be perpetually clutching to egocentric sorts of thoughts. Some of you at this point, I know this is kind of a heavy philosophical stuff, but some of you also might have noticed a problem here. Okay, well, all right, sure. I need to think about this, but if what Buddhists are saying is true, and there's no such thing as an enduring self that stays the same across your lifetime, then what gets reincarnated after you die? How is reincarnation possible in the absence of the self? The answer that Theravada Buddhists give is that, well, reincarnation does happen. It happens in an instant. The Buddha in the Pali Buddhist scripture says that reincarnation happens as quickly as a flame passes from a lit candle to the wick of an unlit candle. It happens momentarily at the instant of death. A person's karma, their memories, and their habits, the essential things that form their personality, um, pass from, well, a dead person's body into the embryo of another living being at the exact moment of death. And the significance of saying that it's these three things, that it's karma, memories, and dispositions that are the bundle of attributes passed from one body to another, is that all of these things are subject to change. Your karma can be increased or decreased. Memories can be forgotten, or new memories can be formed, and all of our basic personality dispositions can also be changed. Indeed, the entire point of the Buddhist path is the gradual reformation of our personality, gradually purifying and correcting our moral dispositions over the course of many lifetimes. So the Buddhist hedge to make reincarnation possible while still denying the self, is to say that these aspects of our mental life continue from one body to the next, but all of them can change. All of them can change massively within one lifetime, even, and of course, are completely malleable or changeable over the course of many, many lifetimes. Indeed, the Buddhist path would be impossible if they weren't. There is still an additional problem. Um, what I explained in terms of the doctrine of no self is a sort of intellectual realization. It's a philosophical argument, right? So you could be sitting here and thinking, okay, I did the readings, I listened to the first part of this video, and that sounds right to me. Yeah, I think that there's no enduring permanent part of myself, and probably I'm going to be a totally different person between now and the time that I'm an old man or an old woman. And I accept all this. The doctrine of no self sounds right to me. Okay, so you accepted the deepest realization that the Buddha had to teach. So are you enlightened now? Are you free of any egocentric thought? Um, if you believe it. Uh, and this is actually something that a question that leads to a major sectarian division between Buddhists, because Theravada Buddhists, or the Buddhists who predominate in Southern Asia, Sri Lanka, Burma, Thailand, Cambodia, they say that the answer is no, that even if you understand all of this stuff at an intellectual level, it still doesn't mean that you are free from attachment, right? Your dispositions can still be in need of a great deal of reform, right? You could still be someone who is centrally attached or greedy or very proud. And in order to reform those dispositions to truly free yourself from attachment, it takes many lifetimes of purification, gradually changing your habits. And enlightenment is going to be a long way in the future. Theravada Buddhism is sometimes called the gradual path towards enlightenment. But there are other Buddhists, indeed many other Buddhists, the majority of Buddhists who belong to the other major sect of Buddhism, known under the umbrella term of Mahayana, the great vehicle, who say, actually, there are shortcuts to enlightenment. That enlightenment is really a matter of a kind of realization that occurs in a split second. Enlightenment is no different than flipping on a light switch. You're not enlightened, you have some realization, you are enlightened. And different sects of Mahayana have different shortcuts, life hacks, actually, for the fast track, the skeleton key to enlightenment. So there are all manner of meditation techniques that Buddhists say can lead to sudden enlightenment, this feature of Mahayana, ritual and meditational techniques that can cause you to break through to the realization of no self in this very lifetime. And for that reason, Theravadins are very conservative about the idea of how many enlightened people there actually are. In Sri Lanka, where I work, they say that the last enlightened person was in the 7th century, so a long time ago. In Mahayana Buddhism, by contrast, the belief is that there are enlightened people in the world today, and they're all around us. Every master of a Zen Buddhist temple is said to have achieved the state of Satori, enlightenment. Every Zen Buddhist master is enlightened according to Zen Buddhism. Tibetan Buddhists believe that there are reincarnated bodhisattvas or fully enlightened beings in the upper ranks of the Tibetan Buddhist church. The Dalai Lama himself is, according to traditional Tibetan belief, the reincarnation of Avalokiteshvara, the thousand-armed bodhisattva of compassion. So, Mahayana, because of this idea of the possibility of sudden enlightenment, they say, no, enlightenment is available for everyone. And indeed, there are enlightened people all around us. Uh, Everyone is always curious about the actual practice of meditation. Every year that I teach this class, it seems like more and more students have tried some kind of breath meditation in one setting or another. When I do this in class, I usually have a Buddhist monk actually come in and talk about meditation and sometimes do a meditation tutorial. I'll just talk a little bit about it briefly. I imagine quite a number of you have done meditation. somewhere in your life so far. It's becoming a more and more popular practice. In the Theravada Buddhist scripture, there is this one text which is basically Meditation 101. It's called the Satipatthana Sutta, the discourse on the setting up of mindfulness. Mindfulness is a word that has really permeated wellness culture in America today. And it is, in fact, a translation from around 120 years ago of this term in Pali from the Pali Buddhist canon, sati, which means really awareness of the present, sort of mental awareness about what your mind and body is doing at any one given moment. And the most introductory meditation instruction that the Buddha offers in this text is called anapanasati, or awareness of breathing in and out. And it's a meditation that can be done in all sorts of postures, sitting down cross-legged, sitting in a chair. The important thing is that however you're sitting, you should have your back up straight. People will sometimes say that you imagine that there's a rope tied to the ceiling that's coming down and anchoring to your head right here, and it's pulling your back up straight. You should have your right hand over your left hand, resting comfortably in your lap. Close your eyes completely, or just imagine that you're focusing maybe 4 feet in front of you on the floor, so your eyes just very slightly open. And what you do is to count the breath, inhale for a count of four, and out for a count of four, and do that up to 10. So that would be one. So you do that 10 times, just focusing on the breath as it goes in and out of your nose right here. And once you get to 10, you start over. And those of you who've done this before know that it's hard. It's hard. You might get to three before you start to get distracted. Really, I don't think that we're hardwired to do this kind of thing, to sit alone and do meditation by ourselves. This was a study that found revealing from a few years ago. It asked for volunteers, paid volunteers, to come into a psych lab with nothing to do. So they had their phones taken away from them. They were just seated at a table where the only thing they had was a button on the table, which was hooked up to a wrist brace and a battery. And if they pressed the button, it would deliver a mild but painful electric shock. And the point of the test was to see how many people would actually sit in the room doing nothing for, what is it, 6 to 15 minutes. Um, or would they prefer to shock themselves? And there was also a gender difference in the outcome of this experiment. So, what percentage of American men do you think would rather literally electrocute themselves than sit alone with their thoughts? And the answer to that was 63% of American men chose to repeatedly press the button. So it was 25% of women. I don't think that we're like predisposed to sitting alone and well doing nothing. So it is hard, right? Um, when you do breath meditation, you're not doing it in a sensory deprivation tank, right? So even if you're sitting in a quiet room, you're going to hear the hum of the HVAC, right, or doors closing outside. If you're doing this in South Asia, where there's less separation between inside and outside, you're going to hear the noises from outside. You're going to hear buses honking and birds chirping, right? You're going to have bodily sensations. Your head might start to itch. Your elbow might start to itch, right? Your stomach might start to rumble, and you might start to get hungry, and your mind might start to wander, and you might think, oh, what do I have in the fridge? Oh, I have some deli meat and some bread, and oh, I wish I had some cake. I wish everything was made out of cake, right? And when these things happen, right, when you have a sensory experience, whether external or internal, when you have the arising of distracted thoughts about being hungry, that doesn't mean that you are failing. What you're supposed to do in the course of this exercise is simply to acknowledge whatever it is that you're experiencing. Okay, heard a crow outside. Sound has arisen, back to the breath. Stomach is rumbling, sensation of hunger has arisen. Okay, back to the breath, right? And as long as you do that, as long as you aren't moved or distracted or pushed away from counting your breaths, then you're actually doing what you're supposed to do, right? It's only when you let your unrestrained association between thoughts take over that you're off track and not doing what you're supposed to do, right? So you think, oh, my stomach is rumbling. I'm hungry. What do I have in the fridge? I have some deli meat. I really need to buy some pickles. Oh, how much money do I have in my bank account? Oh, I need to get my paycheck. I wish I had a better job. This is when you're doing what Buddhists call prapancha or monkey mind. So the undisciplined mind swings from associated thought to associated thought, just as a monkey swings from branch to branch in the forest. This is what psychologists today call diagnostic network mode. And this is precisely what you are supposed to avoid. It's what you're supposed to train your mind not to do in the course of meditation, because Buddhists say training your mind to just focus on that single task of counting the breath in the course of doing your meditation for 20 minutes a day is a way of building your mental muscles so that you will have more awareness, more sati, more mindfulness in whatever tasks you're doing in your ordinary life, right? Anything from like driving your car to having an intimate conversation with someone to doing your homework, that kind of training your mind towards one pointed concentration, singular concentration on one task is a kind of mental exercise that obviously has practical benefits, but which also has soteriological benefits for Buddhists, right? Because Buddhists say that so long as you're just concentrating on this task at hand, you're not going to be distracted with thoughts about the self, right? Thoughts about things that might happen to you in the future, positive or negative. So this kind of mental discipline, the setting up of mindfulness that occurs through this basic meditation is really very essential to the Buddhist path. There are many different forms of advanced meditation for Buddhists. Really, sort of any kind of monastic chore can be a kind of meditation. So, elder monks will tell the younger monks, okay, you'll go out and sweep the monastery grounds. And when you're sweeping, know that you're sweeping. Have mindfulness towards this one single task at hand. There are forms of walking meditation. Many monasteries are set up with these kinds of elevated walkways for doing this. The memorization of texts and the recitation of texts is a kind of meditation. There are various elaborate forms of visual meditation. Also, some of you may have seen this Tibetan Buddhist practice of making sand mandalas, or these very elaborate two-dimensional sand decorative paintings, which can take weeks to make, actually, and they're very meticulously constructed by tapping portions of colored sand onto a table. What these really are two-dimensional representations of palaces of Buddhas. So this is a three-dimensional Buddhist palace, and accompanying the construction of sand mandalas, there are these meditation exercises where monks are told to spend several hours imagining that they're actually going through the grounds of this palace, right? That they're walking through the palace, that they're coming into the main doors, that they're going up to the throne, that they're prostrating the Buddha whose palace it is. So these are all the kinds of imaginative visual meditation exercises that you learn as a monk in the Tibetan tradition. Mindfulness is a kind of buzzword in wellness culture today. You really see it all over the place. You hear about it more and more. There are apps where you can meditate on your phone. One exercise to do is to think of an action word, any action word, and go type in to Amazon.com mindful plus that action word and see if there is a book about it. Mindful birthing, mindful movements, mindful teen, mindful work, mindful sex. Mindful eating has become a trend in the dietetics industry. So people say that if you eat slowly and you pay attention to your satiety cues or what your body is telling you about how hungry you are, then you realize that you actually fill up faster than you think you did, and you'll stop eating sooner, right? So you won't need as much. Mindfulness has been employed in all sorts of contexts, including ones that you wouldn't even expect it. It's there in public schools. There have been experiments implementing mindfulness in high security federal prisons. This was an article I saw that grabbed my attention. Marines are being trained in this kind of breath meditation to combat battlefield anxiety. There's a whole cottage industry of publications, scientific publications about the health benefits of mindfulness. I really just want to give a sort of balanced appraisal of this. There's a whole Wikipedia page on aggregated studies of these thousands of published papers in psychology and medical journals on the effects of meditation. Long story short, there are a lot of intriguing claims, including some which are backed up by rigorous studies about the effects of regular meditation, reducing anxiety, improving concentration, even some claims about meditation having a physical effect on the amygdala or the part of the brain that's responsible for fight or flight response and the emission of cortisol into our bloodstream. The few rigorous studies on meditations, ones that have very large sample groups and ones that have been repeated across different laboratories and different places, are promising in a preliminary way. The problem is that the large majority of these studies are not very good from the point of view of scientific methodology. Most of them have very small sample sizes. Most of them have not actually shown results that have been repeated. So we kind of have to be cautious about claims that meditation is a kind of psychological panacea. But nonetheless, meditation as a way to improve wellness is being taken more seriously by medical professionals. I know that even first year med students in serious med schools are getting some training on incorporating meditation into health regimens. And of course, meditation is embraced by a large number of people in the world of therapy and professional psychology. Mindfulness discourse has even entered the realm of the corporate workplace. There are people who offer training to corporate CEOs on the implementation of meditation breaks for employees. You set out 15 minutes a day for people to go and meditate. This is advertised for a few reasons. It's advertised for the general reason of improving well-being in the workplace. But there are also promises that meditation can actually make businesses better, that more content employees will be more efficient employees, and that at the end of the day, if you give people time for mental health and meditation, your quarterly earnings reports are going to go up, right? And I find all of this interesting. There's some scholarship on it now. You can check out the work of Jeff Wilson if you're interested in this. I do also find it a little bit ironic, though. I mean, what would the Buddha himself have thought about the idea that meditation, which for Buddhists is really all about freeing yourself from attachments, is now being used for the sake of, making money, right? So this is just one ironic element of the expansion of mindfulness discourse in America today. And I'll have a little bit more to say about Buddhism in America in the next lecture.